or tell you, we've put out a few new articles that people have turned into us late. So
for those of you who heard my lecture at the luncheon, you'll know that what started my interest into the UFO community was an incident that in the ufological circle is known as the 1976 Iran incident. REGEHR, who helped me out in my research efforts when I was younger, has put together an unbelievable amount of research on this single incident. I'm really looking forward to watching his lecture. Please let me welcome to the stage REGEHR.
Thank you, John. Good afternoon. Thank you all for coming and sharing this wonderful symposium. We've had two great speakers and a good luncheon, and we're just getting started. And has anybody here learned anything more about the UFO phenomenon? Just a little bit, maybe? Good. Good for you. And I'd like to have a round of applause for John Schuessler and the entire staff at MUFON, Colorado, our AV staff. And I'd like you to give a round of applause for yourselves, because it's you MUFON members who make this all possible. And may I make a suggestion? It's kind of easy to get caught up in the hustle and bustle of day-to-day living, and we have an opportunity to enjoy joining MUFON every symposium. Now would be a good time to do it. It's sort of an anniversary. You could join right now. If you haven't joined before, you haven't seen this, you get a free three-issue subscription to UFO Magazine for all new members of MUFON, and that's a very worthy magazine. I invite you all to take advantage of that. The first thing I'd like to do after this is take a moment to thank MUFON and the staff for choosing my paper, The Iranian UFO Encounter, as the best evidence UFO case. And that was a great honor. Thank you. Sources of information on this case came from my original research, which included probably 500 or 600 FOIAs. I'm not up with John yet, but I'm working on it. One of which was a DIA, a Defense Intelligence Agency report, which talked about this event, and an article from a declassified U.S. Air Force journal called a MIGI journal, which I'll explain in a little bit. And additionally, while I was employed by a small company named Aerojet, I was part of a design team that worked on spy satellites, and our spy satellite spotted this thing, and at the time we didn't know what it was, and because of the different classification levels at different areas, it took us a while to find out what it was. We're all indebted to the late Bob Pratt, who was a National Enquirer reporter. This was when the National Enquirer was a little more respectable than it is today, and he produced some outstanding work. Much of the interviews and notes we get today on this case are as a result of Bob Pratt's work. I just found out moments before coming on stage that Tom Dooley and Bruce Maccabee, you probably know Bruce, those of you who are journal subscribers, the previous two issues, the current issue and the one right before that, talk about this Iranian UFO case. Now, Tom and Bruce, if I've got the story straight, and if I don't, Tom, we'll talk about it later, I apologize, were with the Fund for UFO Research press conference, and someone in the military slipped them a redacted copy of this case encounter, and they eagerly went back and worked on that. Additional sources of this case include an eyewitness to the event. I had a chance to talk with him. You'll see his personal description of the experience when he was a young man living in Tehran. And I was fortunate to get that on tape. And we were on a television program, some of you may remember, I think it's coming back on Discovery, called Sightings. And I've got about a 30-minute clip from the Sightings program I want to share with you. They do a fantastic job of putting this together. As an aside, Sightings crew, I had a small bedroom, just a regular suburban house bedroom, maybe 12 by 10. And in that room, there's my desk, 5 bookcases, Lee Graham and I sitting in little chairs, a producer, a director, a cameraman, a sound man, and a guy holding different reflectors up. We were there for 6.5 hours total. We got maybe 30 seconds of video. And I don't know how they do it. Somebody's got a big case of sales samples for film. All I can say is there's film salesmen make a fortune off of this stuff. I'd like to thank Elaine Douglas, my co-state director from MUFON Utah, for her invaluable help, support, encouragement, and suggestions. And to Grand County High School UFO art student Summer Stewart, who did the illustrations. You're going to see some fantastic color illustrations based upon small black and white sketches. And this is a junior in high school there in a little town of Moab, and she really came through. Oh, gosh, it works. This is an account of a major 1976 UFO incident involving several unknowns. We don't know how many for sure. Attempted intercept by 2 Imperial Iranian Air Force, that's the IIAF. I get to stumble across that. F-4 Phantom jets, large numbers of civilian witnesses. We have government documents that corroborate this encounter and data that show a spy satellite detected this series of UFOs. This case involves physiologic effects on the pilots, and these are beyond, the reports talk about night vision blindness, but it goes beyond that. And this UFO, supposedly their brightness, which is what led to this, I don't believe so. We'll also present theories about vehicles being disabled. And everybody here, I think, has seen Close Encounters of the Third Kind, and the guy sitting in his pickup truck and he can't move, and we've all seen pictures of vehicles that stall around UFOs and then they start up again. We're going to talk about what causes that. I have a theory on that. And then finally, I want to present some of the current ramifications. This is a very important case. And it has all the elements. The government says it has all the elements of a classic UFO case. And what does that mean? And does this 30-year-old case have any bearing whatsoever on current events? And there's some current events over in the Mideast that are kind of scary. So I'll present the case itself via video from Sightings, and then I'll provide my analysis of it and then talk about those ramifications. So if you would please, backstage, please run the first video, the Sightings video. This is from episode 3008, broadcast on 30 October 1994. This is one of those pregnant moments. Run the video, please. There we go.
At the beginning, we thought Iraqi are coming.
All of a sudden, I see this flying object just going round and round and round and going up and up and up. And I told my mom, I said, Mom, I just saw a flying saucer. I saw a UFO.
I was going to prepare myself to shoot it down.
It was with the actual military personnel who witnessed the most compelling UFO encounter sightings has ever investigated. This film, seen by civilians, pilots, generals, and the unerring eye of Air Force radar. Reports ricocheted from the Shah to President Ford and back again. The film that you're watching recreates the day's events here for the first time outside of Iran, was produced by the government, and in a bizarre twist of fate, would one day be used by the Ayatollah Khomeini to discredit the Shah.
When I saw this object is flying that fast, then I thought this is not a helicopter and this is not an aircraft. By that time I said, oh, should be some kind of UFO.
Radar readings taken inside the control tower at Mirabad Air Force Base indicated the object was at least as large as a Boeing 707 tanker. The situation was serious. Brigadier General Nader Yousefi, Base Operations Commander and the number 3 man in the Iranian Air Force, was notified immediately.
So I picked up the phone, and it was the base commander. He wanted me to know they are going to have the airplanes to take off from his base for the scramble mission.
General Yousefi authorized an immediate scramble mission. An Iranian Air Force F-4 Phantom jet fighter was ordered to engage the UFO and determine what it was. The F-4 approached Mach 1 in its pursuit of the UFO. At an altitude of 23,000 feet, the lead pilot reported in that he clearly saw a brilliant object 75 miles ahead of him. His actual radio transmissions are heard here publicly for the first time outside Iran. The F-4 was closing fast, but when the pilot got within 10 miles of the UFO, all onboard instruments failed. The F-4 retreated and then came in for a second pass. Again, the instruments failed. It was as if an electromagnetic force field was repelling the jet fighter. The pilots never got closer than 7 miles before they were forced to retreat.
It may suggest a deliberate kind of control mechanism, perhaps from the phenomenon to the airplane system itself, such that when the airplane is no longer a threat, it can change the radiation or whatever the energy is, whatever the effect is, and so that the systems on board the airplane come back to normal.
I put down my phone and I run to my balcony to see if I can see that object. I saw a big star among the other stars, which it was at least twice as large as the normal star. I asked the car what happened, and he said he lost the communication again.
General Yousefi ordered a second F-4 to engage the UFO. The lead pilot was Iran's #1 top gun, Major Hussein Jafari.
It was around 12 miles. We lost communication, and I heard nothing from the pilot. So I was so scared what's going to happen and what happened to the pilot.
When the F-4 retreated, communication was inexplicably restored.
So I asked from the tower controller to tell them to continue their mission and see if they can get more information from the lineup.
Then Major Jafari nervously reported that a smaller UFO had emerged from the larger one and was trying to engage him.
And it was coming toward them. They tried to shut him down. When they squeezed the trigger, it didn't work, and the trigger was inoperative. They couldn't shoot the missiles.
The pilots, fearing for their lives, tried to eject, but the eject button jammed. Every backup system was inoperable.
We understood that the eject instrument also didn't work. So in this case, I said to God, oh, God save them.
The F-4 had no choice but to go into a negative G-force dive to escape the seemingly hostile UFO. When the fighter jet was 10 miles away from the larger UFO, the smaller craft flew off, and all onboard communication and instrumentation was restored to the F-4. Major Joffrey reported that the smaller UFO appeared to be landing on a mountaintop just southeast of Tehran. This landing was confirmed on the radar by the control tower. Brigadier General Yousefi witnessed it from his balcony.
He went down and landed on the ground. And now it is a communication between the mother ship and that small object. And it shows the lights between those two. It's connected. While they were landing, the car was screaming on the phone to me, General, this flying object is following them and is going to land in thereabout. It's going to, it is in the short final, and I see a big, big light with the glaring red, blue, and yellow lights.
The so-called mothership tailed the F-4 into Mirabad Air Force Base and flew low over the runway. As it performed what was described as a low-altitude flyby, power at the Air Force Base went out.
That was strange for us, and we asked each other why the power went out for some seconds.
Frankly, I don't have any explanation for that, but I will say that there are other cases, well documented, where power has been disrupted on the ground over fairly large areas during UFO presence.
After the flyby, the craft roared off toward the west, as if to say, mission accomplished. Search parties were dispatched to the supposed landing site of the smaller UFO, while the tower tried to track the outbound mothership. It was spotted 25 minutes later over the Mediterranean by an Egyptian Air Force pilot. A report sightings was able to confirm with the Egyptian embassy. Then, over Lisbon, Portugal, the pilot, crew, and passengers of a KLM Airlines flight reported seeing the UFO as it sped westward to the Atlantic. That was the last sighting we know of to date.
When the pilots who had encountered a UFO over Tehran returned home, their ordeal was only beginning. They were shocked to see how their UFO confrontation was being distorted and trivialized by a military-controlled press.
We knew the capability of the other countries and their airplanes' capabilities. It could be a spy airplane. I really have no idea, but maybe from some other war.
The day after the otherworldly encounter over Tehran, it was front-page news in both the Farsi and English-speaking newspapers throughout Iran. At the same time, Iranian and U.S. officials were meeting behind closed doors.
This particular case is interesting from another standpoint, and that is the involvement of the American government.
General Salahat, now in exile in California, was the vice commander of the 2nd Tactical Fighter Base. He told sightings that the day after the UFO event, he attended a top-secret meeting between the Imperial Iranian Air Force and the U.S. Air Force.
General Secord, which was the head of the USAF Response Air Force, probably commander, commanding officer, and operation pilot, approach control of civil aviation.
Hussein Parouzi, an air traffic controller at Mirabad Air Force Base, was also present at that meeting.
When they heard our report and the report of the pilot, they concluded that no country is able to have such a technology. And all of them believed it should be a strange object from outer space.
I collected the report and I made my own observations as a report to my higher echelon, and we sent this report through the Joint Chiefs of Staff to the Shah's intention.
They collect all of those information and send it to the United States by General Secord, because he was the head of the U.S. Air Force in our country.
The secret meetings continued, and rumors of a calculated disinformation program seemed to be borne out by the changing face of Tehran newspaper headlines. Day 1. Day 2. Day 3. Day 4. On day 5, the press reports the entire incident is a hoax.
I don't know why the appropriate authority prohibited me to interview with the press or with a news reporter. I don't know why this information is prohibited from the public.
Somehow the government doesn't want to open up to the public. I don't know why, but...
Despite media dismissals of the event as a joke, our sources report that a full-scale military investigation continued to search for answers.
I asked from the pilot of the F-4 to go and to look after that flying object. He knew where it landed. And when they flew and the Army personnel, they were in the area, they couldn't see anything.
The general who headed that search still lives in Tehran and denied repeated requests for an interview. But others who were present told sightings that no physical evidence of a UFO was found on the mountaintop where so many had reported seeing a small craft landing. However, for the first 3 days after the incident, there were serious electronic anomalies in the area.
The beeping sound that was picked up could be one of a number of things. It might be technology. In fact, depending on the frequency stability and interfrequency pulse and other factors like that, it very likely is a technology of some sort, as opposed to a natural phenomenon.
And then there is this. An American Defense Systems Program satellite operated by the U.S. Defense Department picked up signals from an unidentifiable technology on the same night the Iranian Air Force was scrambling over Tehran. Experts from DSP are revealing this information for the first time.
We saw something.
The DSP satellite is, in fact, a spy satellite that monitors airspace in military hotspots. On the night of September 19, 1976, the satellite was scanning the skies over Tehran.
That's an independent confirmation that an event of some type occurred at that time and place. What it was, we don't know.
Sightings asked the experts to explain the meaning of 238 scans, possible SR. They told us that information was top secret.
Right now, all we can do is say, yes, there was something there.
Certain agencies, including the CIA, have gone on record as having information on this particular case.
In fact, Sightings has obtained these documents from the United States Air Force Security Service that confirm our government's involvement in the UFO investigation. And, according to this Washington Post article, the investigation was still in full force as late as 1979.
Now, what does that say? It says that somebody thought this case was very, very important when it happened. Why, after this many years, that's still important? I think it's a fundamental question, and the American people deserve to know what happened.
Thought that was a pretty good summary. The American people deserve to know what happened, and that's the reason we're here. We're trying to find out and determine what happened. On the front of you saw the booklet there, the Miji Quarterly. There's a quote there by Captain Harry Shields that says, "Sometimes in his career, each pilot can expect to encounter strange, unusual happenings which will never be adequately or entirely explained by logic or subsequent investigation." That's the lead-in quote for the article from the U.S. Air Force Security Service, Miji, M-I-J-I, Quarterly, October 1978, and it contained an article titled, "Now You See It, Now You Don't." And I wondered which government agency came up with the alphabet soup Miji. I had no idea what that meant. And that's just a little aside on that. It stands for meekening, intrusion, jamming, and interference. Meekening, I've never heard that word before, is defined by the Department of Defense as a system for receiving radio beacon signals and rebroadcasting them on the same frequency to confuse navigation. Meekening stations cause inaccurate bearings to be obtained by aircraft and ground stations. That sounds just exactly what happened here in this case. We had all those features here. So we had roughly 500,000 eyewitnesses on the ground, highly credible witnesses, government documents. The highly credible witnesses, 2 Imperial Iranian Air Force general officers, 4 civilian airline crews, trained air traffic controllers and control personnel. Those are all first-hand witnesses. We have DIA, CIA, well, name your favorite agency, NSA, FBI. They all have documents relating to this. And all of them, by the way, you can get on John Greenwald's webpage. We have visual and radar sightings. The F4E crews picked it up on radar. All the witnesses saw it. We have electromagnetic effects that were reported on 3 to 5 separate aircraft, not just the Imperial Iranian Air Force, but also civilian airliners. We had crews who experienced physiologic effects, the night blindness. It's hard from the record to understand whether there's 3, 4, 5 UFOs. I really couldn't tell. I read it over and over and figured, well, there's 3 to 5. Let us let it go at that. And then there was, the event was detected by our spy satellite. So it's a fairly well-documented case. It's not just Billy, Bob, and Joe seeing lights in the sky. So I thought the next thing I'd do was, well, let's get rid of we saw Venus and it's the moon, because it was almost a full moon. There's a program on the web where one can go and put in either latitude and longitude and time and get what the night sky looks like. And so here's a map for September 19th, right around midnight, which is the date of this encounter. And you'll notice that this moon is almost full. I'll try this light pointer here. There's the moon down in the south part of the sky. Now, the way you use these is put it over your head and look, and that's, the north would be over the top of your head, south, then over there we have west and east. Now, Venus here is slightly under the horizon, that's why it's red. So Venus is out of the picture. So we can rule out the moon and Venus, because if we see here, the first initial sightings, here's where Mr. Peruzzi was at the airport down here. Remember over here, below the horizon is Venus, and down here in the south is the moon. These are the exact opposite. So we can rule out definitely that these sightings were Venus and the moon. Other sightings came in during the course of the night. I've tried to get them all located here. And Tehran's a fairly large city. And according to Peruzzi, I saw the object in the northeast part of Tehran. That's right over here. It was a rectangular shape about 5 miles away at a height of 6,000 feet. It was probably roughly 25 foot across and about 7 foot wide. It was seesawing up and down and moving towards the north very slowly. He says, I was amazed. I didn't know what to think. And here's the artist renditions, Stuart Summers' rendition. It's according to Peruzzi, he said, I would say it was probably cylindrical. The 2 ends were pulsating with a whitish blue color. Around the midsection of the cylinder, there was this small red light. Kept going around in a circle. I was amazed. I didn't know what to think. There definitely was a very strange object over Tehran. So at about 12:30 a.m. on September 19th, after determining no helicopters are airborne, there were no aircraft in the area, Peruzzi, the air traffic controller, called the Air Force command post at Shahrokhi Air Force Base to report the UFO. The base commander telephoned Brigadier General Nader Yousefi, who is the 3rd highest Air Force officer in the entire country, and he ordered the scramble of an F-4 Phantom, just like this one, to intercept that device, whatever it was, and find out what it was, to investigate it. So Hamadan, Iran, it's approximately 175 miles southeast of the city of Tehran. So it took off at 1:30 in the morning and proceeded to a point about 40 miles north of town where the last saw the object. But when he got 70 miles away, he could readily see the bright light of this UFO. And because of its size and brilliance, At a range of 25 nautical miles, he lost all of his instrumentation and controls. All the electronics went dead. Now, remember, maybe you, for those of you who don't know, an F-4 had the flight controls, the fuel pumps, and the engines all operated mechanically. So they would not be affected by whatever shut off the electronics. But all the other electronics on this aircraft was shut off. He turned away, broke off from the object, and when he apparently was no longer a threat, his electronics came back on. The Shahrokhi Air Force Base is down in here. Tehran is right up there. I inadvertently cut it off when I sized it. As the first interceptor's fuel ran out, and possibly believing the aircraft was experiencing unexpected electronic problems, a second F-4E was launched in an attempt to intercept this unknown. And General Yousefi continues his quote saying, "Later, I ordered him to close again. And when he came within 20 miles of the object, he lost his function of all his electronic equipment. Finally, he said he would have to return to base because his fuel was running low. At that point, the object was about 15 miles from me at about 12,000 feet. The second jet called on the radio and says, 'You go back to base, I'll follow the object and see what I can find out.' And the first pilot said, 'Well, can you see it?' And he says, 'Of course I can see it. Even though I'm 100 miles away, I can see it.' So it's a pretty bright object. The second pilot got within 25 miles. Routinely reported, 'I've got the object in sight, I've got lock.' Lock means that the instrumentation on the aircraft has mated with the weapon system so that when the weapon is launched, that it will strike the target. The instant that happened, he lost all of his electronics, including his intercom between his back seater. So he was flummoxed. He fell away and swung his jet around and returned to Tehran. And as he turned, the object launched a bright light that started chasing him. He regained all of his power controls and everything, and he's screaming in the headphones about being chased by this UFO. Really scared him. He said the size was comparable to a 707 tanker. Here's what he saw. These lights rotated so quickly that they appeared to all be showing at once. The size of the radar return that he reported was the size of a 707, which is about 150 foot long. He couldn't determine the visual size because it was so bright it interfered with this, and then the strobe lights going all around it, and it just somewhat disoriented him. He said it was too dangerous to get any closer, and he decided to come in and land. And every time he started to close, all of his instrumentation went off. And he says, "Oh," let's see, I'll quote, "The illuminated object separated again and is going towards the ground. Now he is settling on the ground. Can you see him?" The general couldn't see him because he wasn't high enough. The pilot reported the object had settled on the ground southeast of Tehran, and the main object is orbiting slowly over this object that went on the ground. He says, "I can see it. It's bright, like daytime." At that point, air traffic controller Perosi sees this object. He says, "Suddenly it appeared to disappear and then suddenly reappear a mile further in just seconds. I can see this time it was as bright as the sun. It was all green and yellow like a star, but much bigger. Then it appeared to me to be like a starfish. I can't be sure of all the colors, but there was blue and orange and red and yellow lights." Following day, during daylight the next morning, the F-4 crew was taken out by helicopter such as this one to an area where the object had apparently landed. They looked for it, could not find anything. There was a strange beeping still going on, and the loudest signal came from a small home where a couple lived. They talked with the couple, and as they talked to them, they said, "Yeah, we were here in bed and we got this bright light." I guess it was sort of like the voice from God we got the other night when the fire was here. And it's a little bit of lightning and thunder. They thought it was just a major storm. They just turned over and went back to bed, didn't worry about it. They did, government did radiation testing in the area, And whatever results they had have never been made public. And if you recall, this was when the Shah was in control. Shortly after that, religious faction took over, and it's been a pretty much of a dead zone since then. Later that night, as you saw in the video, UFO was reported over Morocco and in Portugal, and there they claimed it was a blue cylinder or sphere. Maybe it depends on how you look at it. If you look at a tin can on end, it's a circle. If you look at it from the side, it's a rectangle. But over Lisbon, Portugal, it was a blue cylinder. So there we have it. That's the case. Several witnesses saw it. Air traffic controller receives the lights, receives mysterious emergency beacons, calls the Air Force. The third highest ranking officer there orders interceptors to be launched. Both Air 4E crews experience bizarre problems, and their craft are disabled. 3 jetliners, a BOAC jetliner, forget the second one, and an Iranian airliner, all 3 experience electronic anomalies, the navigation fluctuating. Over 1.5 million, over 500,000 witnesses on the ground. And that's about where the story ended. Most people think that's about the end of the story. Well, this, as you saw in the video, this is a 2nd generation satellite. Its primary mission is to detect missile launches. But when we got the report, we get this message. This first part is the event log number. That means it's a fast walker. It was a teletype message, 238 scans, possible SR. The duration was almost 40 minutes. And this is from our itty bitty, we call it, itty bit, that's just lighten the mood a little bit. And it's a log of all DSP sightings. If you remember the video, Lee was looking through a book about 6 inches thick. I used to have that. I misplaced it somewhere. But we cover the entire landmass of the Earth, stereo vision, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. The difference is we don't cover most of the places that are friendly. Like, we don't waste electronics looking at Denver, Colorado, because we probably won't get any threats from Denver, Colorado. So what's a fast walker? Fast walker is what we characterize this event as, and that's defined as detection of a space object in a satellite's field of view, which triggers a response of the satellite and the ground data processing software. And that definition is taken from Air Force Space Regulation 55-55, dated 1992. And by the way, Jacques Vallée published a very good book called Fast Walker. We're going to do a little case analysis. The instrumentation, navigational aids, weapons controls, communications were all disabled. The aircraft emergency beacon signal was heard by the tower, all 4 airliners in the area, the 2 fighter pilots. Their vision was interfered with. There was interference on UHF band, and when they got within 30 to 50 degrees of approach, at 150-degree heading, 30, 50 degrees in that 50 heading, all their navigation instruments went bad. So was this jamming? Was it a powerful EMP, electromagnetic pulse, or something else? Well, according to some, this loss of equipment was caused by jamming. And I don't buy that. Jamming is a technique wherein we transmit a stronger signal right in a near frequency, and it interferes with that signal. You get that sometimes when you're traveling out west here, and you get a little bit of signal, you get static, so then you get beat signals that come in. You hear one station in the country western and then the gospel hour all at the same time. That's more like jamming. This wasn't jamming. This wasn't jamming. Others suggest it was a very strong electromagnetic pulse, and I'm not convinced of that either, because we can do that. We have that technology to turn off electronics. What we do is we just give it a strong burst of energy, and that burns the components. They actually burn, fuse the little metal pieces inside. The trick is we can't turn them back on. The UFO can. Yeah, as a matter of fact, right now, some police departments, you may have read in the paper, are working on putting an EMP pulse generator in the front of their squads, and when they have these big chase scenes that go across and endanger people's lives, they flip the switch, burn up the car's computer, the car coasts to a stop. So we have then a third alternative, something else. And that something else is what I think is what happened. And that something else was somehow they can stop the flow of electrons. Now, if we can stop the flow of electrons, we can turn off electronics. We can turn them back on just by allowing the electrons to flow again. You and I do this every time. I push this little button, and that enables a flow of electrons from the switch, through the batteries, and then generate this powerful light. We all do that at homes with our light switches. I don't know how they turn on and off the flow of electrons, but I know they don't do it by a strong EMP, which is burn the electronics, and I know they don't do it by jamming. That's not what happened. The first report of electronics emergency signals came from a BOAC airliner who called and said, "You have a crashed aircraft in the air. We're receiving an automatic signal on," well, you can read that, 121.12. Then Swiss Air, Lufthansa all reported these. And that was when he decided Perosi was going to launch, call the Air Force and find out. Remember when I said this had all the elements of a Meiji case? Beaconing, interference, jamming, and intrusion. Well, this beacon signal is exactly that. It was an emergency beacon on an international frequency which confused the navigation when these guys went to land their aircraft and threw off their bearings. That's what happened. That's precisely what happened. Then they had some difficulty adjusting their night visibility for landing, so after orbiting Marabot a few times, they went in straight for landing. Well, the pilots and weapon control officers of both F-4s experienced this temporary night vision blindness. Now, whether this was attributable to the brightness and size of the UFO, we'll never know. But I don't think it was. To attribute this to the UFO may be premature. We humans see because of electronic radiation in the visible spectrum. There's a big spectrum. The visible is a little portion of it. You've got infrared and ultraviolet. And the way this works is a photon, an element of light, is modulated and comes in, is directed to the rods and the cones at the back of our eye. And they're converted to be a quantum synopsis, I love that little phrase, into an electrical impulse. And these then transfer electron flow back to our brain, where our brain says, oh, that's what we're seeing. Now, that's electron flow. We aren't shielded too well, and what may very well have happened is that the energy that shut off the electronics may have interfered with the electron flow within the vision centers of the eye of the pilots. Because we know the way our eyes work, the more energy there is, the brighter the light. We look up at those are bright lights, by the way. I can't see anybody out there, and that's because of bright lights. So recall the 10-minute flight at 1,100 miles from Hamadan to Shahrokhi. Because of low fuel, the F-4 pilots are going to be going slower. They're not going to be going Mach 2 like they were coming in. They're going to be maybe 600 knots going back. That would give them a flight time of 20 minutes. Add to that a minute or two for clearance. We get maybe 25 minutes from the time they break off engagement till they go to land. They're still suffering night vision blindness. There is no way that we have night vision blindness persistence for 20 minutes. It just doesn't happen. So this night vision blindness was not attributable to the brightness of the UFO, but to some physiologic effect that was induced by the UFO to disorient the pilots, just as they induced a signal on the transmitters, just as they put the emergency beacon down. This was not a polite act. Oh, good, I got the right slide. Both F-4 pilots and airline crews reported that each time they passed through this bearing of 150 degrees, they would lose 30 to 50 degrees. So they've got this wide swath. They can't land by instruments. And remember, beaconing is defined as a system for receiving radio beacons on rebroadcasting on the same frequency, which confuses navigation. That's exactly what happened. That's a hostile act. Blinding pilots is a hostile act. Disabling aircraft is a hostile act. Disarming weapon systems is a hostile act. Invading a sovereign airspace is a hostile act. This encounter was a series of hostile acts, and that's going to get the attention of governments. And so we had a DIA evaluation, we had the Iranian government involved, we had the Pentagon, the Air Force, and the State Department. Everybody was concerned that the UFO could operate with impunity over someone's sovereign airspace, defeating our most advanced weapons systems, and even casually demonstrating how much power they had. Remember, in 1976, Iran was governed by Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, the Shah of Iran. He was our closest ally. He got the very best frontline equipment that we could offer, and in return, we got Iranian crude oil. It was a pretty good deal for us. We helped supply, maintain, and train his pilots, his Air Force, his crews, his Navy, and they were some of the best in the world. And then as now, we would use them as test beds. We weren't at war with anybody, but if they were at war, we could use our weapon systems and see how they worked. And the Soviets were doing the same thing, by the way. They were providing their weapon systems, so you and him could fight, and we could find out how our weapons worked. Defense Intelligence Agency prepared a report, that's a big number report, about this, and Major Evans, who wrote the report, said, "This is an outstanding report. This case is a classic, which meets all the criteria necessary for a valid study of the UFO phenomenon." A, the object was seen by multiple witnesses from different locations, as Sharaman, Marabad, the Dry Lake bed, viewpoints from the aircraft, viewpoints from the ground. He says, continues, the credibility of many of the witnesses was high. Air Force General, air crews, radar operators, visual sightings were confirmed. Similar EME were reported by 5 different aircraft. There were physiological effects and an inordinate amount of maneuverability, so the DIA was impressed. The Iranian government, Lieutenant General Abdullah Azerbaijan, said that he was then the Deputy Commander-in-Chief of Operations, acknowledged this, and some of the things he said were rather startling. He acknowledged that both jets had been locked onto the object, and their radars had received very strong signals, and then something happened. They failed. All the electronics failed. He could not explain it. And if there was any information he had as to what these things were, he says, no, we don't know, but of course we passed all that information on to the Air Force. Remember, the U.S. Air Force doesn't get involved in these things. Asked to elaborate, General Azerbaijan said, we have this procedure. If there is some information on UFOs, we just exchange it. And we did. We gave all the information to the U.S. Of course, that was the request that the U.S. And we gave this to our MAG, and a MAG is a Military Advisory and Assistance Group, and that was headed by General Robert Secord, who you recall was a key player in the Iran-Contra affair. And General Azerbaijan went on to report and confirm that the jets got knocked out within 15 minutes or so. Somehow they were able to recover from that. The first time, he said, we had everything locked on. And he says that means fire control radar, everything was locked on, and everything went dead. And he says, but we never, ever ordered them to shoot at a UFO. Okay, I'll accept that. The Pentagon, Colonel Frank McKenzie, defense attaché, wrote a message back. And interesting enough, his message was word for word for word for word identical to Evans' message. I mean, even the punctuation was the same. So I guess the career officers don't always write their own reports. And he detailed this, and he sent his copies to the CIA, the NSA, the Secretary of State, the White House, Deputy Secretary of Defense, Secretary of Defense, National Military Control Center, National Military Intelligence Center, Chiefs of Staff of the Army, Navy, Air Force, as Commander-in-Chief of the European bases of Lindsay and Ramstein, and other bases. I couldn't read the rest of them. So it was an important message. Part of the job, he said in this report, is reporting on unusual things. And this UFO report is unusual regardless of whether you believe in them or not. Okay. And it said he said, continues, this thing had such a big play in the papers over here, it was almost unreal. Now, he was reporting this in accordance with a procedure called JANAP 146, Joint Army, Navy, Air Force Procedures, JANAP. And that requires them to report these sightings. That's still in effect. The Air Force response was Colonel Mui, Air Force MAG officer. And he was one of the ones that met and debriefed the First Lieutenant Jamal Damani and Second Lieutenant Hussein Shahrokhi, and I apologize, I don't speak Farsi, so I probably murder their names. The crew of the second F-4 Phantom jet went up that night. And his report states again, this is a classic case because of everything that was bizarre about it was confirmed with real sources. We don't have this capability to jam all these systems. This incident came through as a routine intelligence analysis. I was given the report because my field's electronics warfare. This is Mui talking. The DIA community is broken up by region. He was the Middle Eastern guy. Finally, we have Secretary of State Kissinger, whose response, we've heard this one before, we no longer study UFOs, and what you probably saw was a meteor or space debris. And then we get over 500,000 eyewitnesses. And if you could please run the video. The video. Woke you up. Maybe.
Hi, Ron. Just wanted to make a comment. I was 12 years old in Tehran when the Iranian incident took place. And the impression that was given off of the tape was that it was some sort of a military incident and nobody heard about it. Let me assure you, this thing was huge. Something like half of Tehran were running on the roof when we heard the A4 Phantom jets running overhead. They were breaking windows all over the place. And people running to the roof, we thought maybe it was the Iranian New Year because the bangs were going back and forth. And half of the city of Tehran, we were on the higher side of the plateau of the Tehran mountains over there. And we were seeing the entire city, you know, the lights all of a sudden turn on and people running up to the roof and watching this thing. And the actual UFO itself might have been actually 3 or 4 stadium size long. I mean, this thing was immense. And when you saw talking about the little object that came out and engaged the F-4 Phantom jets, you could see, I mean, the disparity in the technology was immense because when I was 12 years old, Jane's Almanac, it's a British publication about military hardware. Right. That was like my Bible. I mean, every kid that I knew was always reading that, wanted to know about the new F-14 and whatnot. So I knew about technology a little bit. and the F-4s would go something like this across the horizon, and this thing would go blip, 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 would make circles around it. I mean, I'd never seen anything like it. And once it landed, all Iranian men that I knew in my neighborhood as I was watching off the rooftops were jumping into their cars and were going into the eastern region of Tehran to see what had landed. I mean, there were like caravans, and people were announcing on the radio, hey, don't, get back into your houses, get back into your houses. Police were coming out. That's why you saw a lot of pictures of women in veils with kids. I mean, that was for real. It was like mayhem. And I think somebody had estimated, I read about it years later in Herald Tribune, that actually is the biggest sighting ever recorded in history, because the city of Tehran at the time had something like 1 million residents, and could easily say about half of them were up and one way or another participating in this.
Thank you very much.
Okay, stop the video. Iran was not the first, and the U.S. is preparing for a space war, and we know that from SDI and the Space Warfare Division. We've had 17 incidents I was able to find out of other planes, pilots having adverse effects from encounters with UFOs, and this is the list of them. The third one down, 1950, unknown object disables an NACA test plane over California. That was my uncle, and he was flying a test aircraft, an unknown designation, and when he landed, he got extremely cold. His co-pilot, backseater, got extremely cold, wrapped him in heat blankets. Another crew died that was on the same flight. They almost froze to death. So we have 17 sightings. These are the list of them. I want to speed through here a little bit. If anybody's interested, I'll get back and just let me know. I'll get copies of these for you. And all of these were aircraft or crews that encountered problems. Now, briefly, I'm going to skip over here. We're going to talk about, finish up here. Government doesn't use the term UFOs anymore. They use UERs, unknown event reports, and UCTs, uncorrelated targets. UCT is the primary term, and there are 4 categories of UCT: significant, non-significant, critical, and false. Air Force Regulation 5512 requires that copies of these significant and critical reports be sent to the 4 space commands: Air Force Space Command, Navy Space Command, Air Space Command, and NORAD. And they are planning a space war. This is from Air Force Regulation 55-20, warning verification of hostile space events. That's the title of this document. It's secret. This regulation establishes procedure to provide timely and accurate status reporting, warning, and verification of hostile space events to the National Command Authorities, collateral agencies, space system operators and owners, and defense forces from Headquarters Space Command's Space Defense Operations Center. This is the Aggressor Squadron's patch. It's a 527th Space Aggressor Squadron. It's stationed at Shriver Air Force Base here in Colorado. And its mission is to train people for space combat. As of March 24th, 2004, they had 55 personnel. Here is the shoulder patch for the Space Battle Lab, which is to provide support combat operations through innovative and revolutionary applications of space systems, and to derive revisions to doctrines, organization, training, and requirements through modeling, wargaming, and operational demonstrations. So if the government just last week announced that they were planning on putting a series of laser weapons into space Protect our space assets? From whom? I mean, we don't have any enemies like that anymore. So I think they're training for something else. I'm not sure what it is. You can use your imagination, and it may have something to do with 3 of the letters in MUFON. We have 7 minutes remaining. Anybody have any questions? We can answer questions now. If you would, please come over to the microphone, and I'll answer any questions I can. I promise not to make anything up. If I don't know the answer, I'll tell you I don't know the answer.
I don't know if you're familiar with the recent revealed British Condign report. It was revealed on May 15th of this year. Are you?
The British contract for what?
The British Condign report on UFOs. It was a 3-year study by the British government of UFOs that they finally admitted they had through an FOIA request from the British people.
I'm not familiar with it. I've seen it, but I haven't had an opportunity to read it. I was preparing for this presentation, and I just...
Anyway, it's a very detailed report. It's 460 pages, and it's got a lot of scientific background in it. And essentially it blames UFOs on plasma. And it has plasma of all types. They can absorb light, they can reflect light, they can make them look like they're just metal discs. They can emit electromagnetic radiation or microwave or whatever.
Great, I'll look forward to reading it.
The question being, is there a chance that this is what people were seeing? I mean, they claim that the aircraft, the metal of the aircraft resonates somehow with the plasma and makes the plasma follow the aircraft, and they explain the Foo Fighters this way. And I'm just wondering if that makes any sense at all to explain this UFO.
It doesn't make sense as an explanation for Foo Fighters because there was no way I'm aware of to generate a plasma in World War II at will. We could see it has been seen in almost fire around for a long time. But
this is all speculation, but that's, I just thought you might not be interested.
Okay, thank you.
How does any of this relate to the current war in the Middle East?
I don't. The question is, the microphone's not on. The question is, how does this relate to the current war in the Middle East? Is that right? I don't know that it does, but the interrelationship of events is such that sometimes 2 apparent discontinuous events are linked together, and I don't know if this is one of those cases or not. I don't see any links right now, but I won't rule that out. Yes?
Ron, you ran this system, DSP-1. Can you tell us, or will you tell us, what was seen and how it was seen, the detection method?
Okay, the DSP is a system that operates primarily in the infrared region, and that's because what we were looking for is high-intense energy sources, one of which is plasma. And we do that with a series of detectors that fit on a detector array about that big. And then we've got a 6-foot-long telescope that sits in front of that to magnify the whole thing. We can see slightly above the Earth's disk all the time, and we put 3 of them around the Earth, and that enables us to have stereo vision of any position on Earth at any time. It operates 24/7 from 23,200 miles up. It is not threatened by ground-based systems. The other satellites you hear about, a lot of the keyhole satellites, they're at between 80 and 120 miles up, and they are threatened by ground-based systems. The DSP was designed primarily to detect missile launches. That was the ostensible reason. But remember, the Soviet Union and the U.S. were both concerned about starting first strike capability during the Cold War. We didn't want to do that. And one of the publications I came across was in a 1985 article published by the Soviet Union that said we don't want to misidentify UFOs as warheads and start a world war. And so our satellite, as we found out, has detected over 76,000 fast walkers, and fast walkers are, by definition, UFOs. So I suggest the strong possibility that it was designed as a second design characteristic to detect UFOs, because we do that quite well. And the reason for the difference in color of a UFO is as the energy gets more intense, it gets brighter and brighter. It goes from a dark, dull red up to an orange, a yellow, through blues, and then gets to be a blue-white, like some of these new headlights you see in the highways. And then it gets so bright that it mimics the sun, and then it will just disappear. And those are different energy levels, and we see those. Any further questions? Well, thank you very much. I appreciate it.
All right, just real quick, and then we're going to break. I was supposed to announce this before the last lecture. William Swenson in the room next, so go to the registration desk. There's something up there for you. With that said, you guys have 3 more minutes by the time I put this microphone down to bid on the event. I am not sure exactly what time they will pull that, but it's about 3 minutes from now. So if anybody wants to go bid on that, now's your chance, and good luck. The silent auction will close tomorrow, Sunday at 12 o'clock.